Maruti Suzuki's People Technology presents Suzuki Connect with Navigate to Car and many other features.
Watch more, feel more. Dell.
Here we go then, the final weekend of the Super 12s of the ICC Men's T20 World Cup 2021 as teams look to get ready for the semi-finals and others look to get home. Australia are in the category of the former. That win against Bangladesh puts them exactly where they want. The run rate is in their favour. They sit pretty at number 2 just after England in this Group 1, and they'd like to now put matters beyond South Africa. That's the evening fixture, England versus South Africa, and ensure a semi-final berth in all likelihood against Pakistan. We look forward to that game as the West Indies, defending champions, will formally finish their campaign. Their title defence is already concluded, and we'll get Daren Ganga's thoughts. So too Tom Moody's on Maruti Suzuki presents ESPN Cricket Info T20 Timeout, powered by Dell. It's gone well for Australia suddenly, Tom. We were wondering, are we going to see the best of them? Could South Africa catch up? After that Bangladesh game, winning the toss today, suddenly they're in a pole position to nail the semi-final spot. You're expecting them to put in a strong effort today, I'm guessing.
Yeah, you would have thought so, Ronak. They've sort of come into the tournament, a little bit disheveled, unsure about what their right combination is. They had a poor lead-up with games in Bangladesh, a series against Bangladesh and a series against the West Indies where they lost and lost poorly. But they're just starting to get their rhythm together, and it seems like there's certain players are starting to find some form, which is important for them. Still don't think they're anywhere close to where they need to be if they're going to compete with what are the real form sides of this tournament. But today's another opportunity where they can make another positive step forward.
The West Indies. I wonder what the expectations are out of this game, Daren. I wonder what sort of chat's been gone around in the last few days once their campaign was formally concluded, and what can we expect from the West Indies today on their way out?
Well, Ronak, I can tell you the talk of the town is the subpar performance of this West Indies team at this ICC Men's T20 World Cup. I've been in and around Trinidad and Tobago, and everyone is talking about the lack of production from the senior players in this West Indian side. That to me is the highlight of what has happened so far. These big name players who have dominated T20 cricket across the globe in third-party franchise tournaments, they just haven't come to the party for the West Indies. I speak of the captain, Kieron Pollard, Chris Gayle, Andre Russell, Dwayne Bravo. They haven't really made a significant impact, and many feel that that's been the reason why this team hasn't really delivered as expected. Today is another opportunity. I think if they can save face, I hate saying playing for pride, because every single game in a World Cup is very important, and you'd want to qualify for a semi-final round, especially as defending champions. They haven't played to their potential as a team. Strategically, many are debating the squad that has been selected for this World Cup. But again, it's another opportunity, and Pollard will want to finish things off with a win and maybe just smooth over some of the disappointment that has been created from this World Cup.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good opportunity to actually discuss the West Indies, who are such a talked about team in T20 cricket. Tom Moody's with us. We discussed this with Mahila and Daren in the last game too, so we'll come to that in a bit. Let's just give you team news. Australia are unchanged, which is something we expected once Mitchell Marsh came back. The West Indies make one change. Ravi Rampal is out, and Hayden Walsh Jr. comes in. Daren, I wonder if that's too little too late. You've been calling for Hayden Walsh Jr. to get a game for a large part of the tournament now.
Yeah, whether that's because of what we've seen from Adam Zampa, his opposite number, who's dominated for Australia with the ball. He's the leading wicket taker. We've seen wrist spinners dominate this tournament. So too little too late. As a leg spinner, you want to give that type of bowler confidence very early in a tournament to have an impact. They just haven't done that. So this is more of a reaction, so to speak, in Abu Dhabi. I don't know if Hayden Walsh will create this sort of impact now, knowing fully well that the West Indies has not qualified for the semi-final. But again, for him, I think he's still a young man. He's still someone who can vouch for a place in that World Cup team in 2022. So he will look at this opportunity as a chance to enhance his reputation, and hopefully it goes well for the West Indies.
Absolutely. Australia are unchanged, Tom. So clearly now they've identified that their best team would be Mitchell Marsh at three and four specialist bowlers.
Yeah, look, I think we're all surprised when Mitchell Marsh was left out in the early parts of the tournament for Ashton Agar. It certainly threw the balance of the side. Mitchell Marsh came into the tournament as one of the form players, and it's not like Australia had an overwhelming number of batsmen that came into the tournament in form, but he was one that was in form. So that was a surprise to see him left out, but he's back, and I think he creates a better balance for the side. So it's good for Australia that they're not looking to chop and change too much, because as we know, in tournament cricket, the sides that really are the ones that are struggling more often than not are trying to make as many changes as possible to try to find the magic recipe. But they're remaining consistent with their selection, and obviously they've got fitness, full fitness of all their players and their availability. So again, they're on the rise, and today's another opportunity for them to continue to build on their campaign. So they're number one, secure a semi-final position, but secondly, go into the semi-finals feeling confident that they're getting close to their best cricket.
Yep, always a team that you can't take lightly, especially as an ICC event comes to its closing stages. But we're going to spend some time today on the West Indies. We had a comprehensive analysis of this when Daren and Myla Jayawardena are with us. I'm glad that Tom's here. He knows enough of these West Indies players, has followed them around the year. We'll throw up some numbers, Tom, for you, and I'll also fill you in on what Myla and Daren had to say the other day. Let's look at some of their numbers for their batting. It's been the bigger disappointment, you'd think, even though we did spend a lot of time discussing even the lack of an X factor player in there with Paul. That's the West Indies batting in the middle overs in this tournament so far. That's how they've gone. Run rates of 6.1, 5.8, and 2.9. Very forgettable game against England. The other key number is the dot ball percentage. They've played a lot of dot balls as the West Indies. Tom Moody's been on a number of those games, pointed out what the average dot balls would be. West Indies have gone in excess of 50, I think, a couple of times, but that's what the percentages look like. Now, when Myla was here last time with Daren, Tom, Daren said this is an outdated brand perhaps of T20 cricket. Myla said perhaps it's somewhere in the middle. I'm trying to figure out, have they just got it wrong for one tournament? And can they still get it right if this was a tournament in India or next year in Australia in better conditions? Or do they need some sort of complete overhaul and rethink about how they play their T20 cricket?
I think a lot of those statistics reflect where a lot of the players are at with their career, and I think also it also reflects the brand of cricket that was successful leading up to this point. But I think we've seen over recent years, and I'd say years, probably the last couple of years, is that we've seen that not the rest, but most teams catch up with a power game that the West Indies has brought to T20 cricket. You know, the boundary hitting, the six hitting and the four hitting. But they've brought with that what they already existingly had, and that was the management of dot balls. So the West Indies have still got the power brand, even though that has fallen away because of the age and stage of some of their cricketers. But they haven't addressed their dot ball issue and the management of their dot balls. So there's a decline in their power hitting, and there's also the consistency with their dot balls, which has never been good. But they've got away with it in the past because of their extraordinary boundary hitting. So the likes of England are probably the best example, have brought the power game. They're hitting as many sixes and many fours as any other team. Their running between the wickets is extraordinary. And I'm not just talking about the singles. I'm talking about the twos that they pinch and the threes they manage to steal. So their overall management of run scoring is at an extreme level. And that's where the game's at the moment. And you can't afford not to have both of them. You have to have the power game, but you also have to manage the dot balls.
Interesting. So if we talk personnel, Daren, and we spoke last time in the Sri Lanka game that perhaps the West Indies now need to look beyond Chris Gayle. We know they look beyond Dwayne Bravo now. As I look at the experienced batters for the West Indies now, and there's another World Cup in a year's time, so it's not like you have a lot of time to rebuild and change the team up. But you think Chris Gayle is someone they move on? What about Lendl Simmons at 36, found his way out of the team? He struggled in that one game. Will there still always be room for Andre Russell and Kieron Pollard, at least with another World Cup in less than a year's time?
Well, those spots as you for the West Indies, it's a matter of these contenders showing the form and showing that propensity to take those positions which are available. Brandon King, he's been tried with at the top of the innings. He hasn't really shown consistency at the international level to command a spot in this West Indian side. But I think this World Cup will usher in major changes when it comes to players in T20 cricket going forward in that next World Cup. I think with regard to the dot ball percentages and the brand of cricket we've seen from the West Indies, from a batting point of view, for a lot of people, it has been the ignorance to appreciate that there are deficiencies that needs to be addressed. And it starts from the top. I remember the 13 matches which were played prior to this ICC T20 World Cup. A lot of times when the West Indies played against South Africa, when they played against Australia, when they played against Pakistan, these dot ball numbers were quite high. And many times as commentators, when we raise those sort of matters with the captain, Karen Pollard, and with the coach, it was as if their power hitting was more dominant than that being an issue. So now I think there will have to be a deep introspection. They will have to recognize that, yep, they're being matched, as Tom Moody mentioned, from teams like England in their power game. So they need to come with a better balance to their batting approach and show softer skills. And as I've mentioned before, whether that comes from picking other players who can provide that and complement the boundary hitters, that needs to happen very quickly, because the West Indies can't just rely on their batting power to win T20 matches.
That's exactly where I was going next. Is the solution, Tom, finding different personnel who play differently, who are busier? Or is it telling Kieran Pollard after 572 T20s and Andre Russell after 386 T20s, you can't be consuming these sorts of dot balls? You have to find a different tempo to your game.
Well, to be honest with you, I don't think Pollard and Russell are the ones that are under the microscope with regards to dot ball management, because their role in the side is a completely different role to the area that we're talking about. They manage the last 6 overs. They're arguably two of the best finishers currently playing, even though they may not have had the World Cups that we would expect them to. But I still put them in the category of in current terms, there is, when it comes to finishers, they're right up there amongst the very, very best. So what their requirements are is extreme high percentage of boundary hitting at the pointy end of the business, at the pointy end of the innings. It's really the first 15 overs, the first 14 overs. That's the area that needs to be managed, and more importantly, outside of power play between 7 overs and the 15th over mark, is when generally there's a high volume of spin, and you need to be able to have the skill to be able to not only find a boundary if the right matchup is there, but if you're not finding that boundary or the matchup isn't there, it's a minimum requirement that you can score a single off every single ball that you face. So what they need to do is look at the personnel that are in that top 5. Are they the right personnel to be able to do that seamlessly? Have they got the skill? Have they got the the capability to be able to get through the wickets quickly and hustle up the wickets and turn a 1 into a 2, all those types of things, and base their selection around that criteria along with form. We know that there's a huge amount of experience in that top order that have played for many, many years and have had decorated careers, but at the bottom line is, how are you performing now? It's not how you were performing a year ago or 2 years ago or 5 years ago. What are you doing right now? What are you giving us over the last 6 weeks, over the last 6 months? And we will make a judgment on selection based on what your current form is.
Okay, interesting. Daren, I wonder how much you subscribe to what Tom said right now. And if you do, then is the solution simply we move on from Gale, we move on from Simmons? They've been responsible for this. And Evan Lewis is okay, Hetmeyer's okay, Pooran's okay, and Roston Chase, who's only played 2 T20s, will get more time. So it's not a lot of changes needed, just a couple.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, it's important to recognize the role of different players. I mean, I was very surprised that during those 13 T20 international matches, which happened in the Caribbean in the build-up to this World Cup, that the likes of Shimron Hetmyer, even Nicholas Pooran, was never given the opportunity to bat in top 3, or very rarely given the opportunity to bat in that position. So I would think that those are two players that you want to groom in the right manner. You just don't want them to be finishers of the game. You want these guys to come into a T20 innings, be able to rotate stride, be able to assess the situation and play accordingly. They are young players. They are very talented as batsmen. And I think the West Indies has to rely a lot on these two players to sort of manage the power play, the middle overs, to make sure that they play with the right tempo. And these are two guys who also have a power game. So the reliance must be on these two guys. They must be groomed properly. They can't just be, players who bat the last 3 or last 4 overs. I think those two, Hetmeyer and Puran, they are the solutions for the West Indies when it comes to batting in that first 15, and they must be invested in.
All right.
Just if I could add something there, Ron.
Yeah.
If I could add something there, the challenge that the West Indies face is that they're in their top order, their 3 best players currently is Lewis, Puran and Hetmeyer, all 3 left-handers. So West Indies need to identify 2 right-handers to complete that top 5, because otherwise they have a huge imbalance where a team can really match up well against them. So, whether that's Roston Chase as being one of those right-handers, and whether there's Brandon King is persevered with, they need to try to find that balance in that top 5 to give them the right combinations left and right. Otherwise, they leave themselves a little bit exposed to a good side that can match up well against those left-handers.
I'm just thinking, Daren, before I go to it, whether they could have just given Andre Fletcher a game today, instead of a Chris Gale, or that sort of thing just not done.
Yeah, I mean, it was an option. It would have been a judgment call. I think Andre Fletcher might have been a better option against Sri Lanka. I spoke about his record against Sri Lanka. He's probably got his best batting record against that team, and he was not given the opportunity. So I feel that the West Indies is investing in that decision that they made a long time ago with Chris Gale, and there's been a commitment to play him throughout this tournament. I don't subscribe to that approach. That's not the right approach. You can't just predetermine players and predetermine particular 11s for opposition teams and conditions. Cricket is played on the day, and there must be a certain priority and waiting for the conditions, the opposition teams, looking at the matchups, the cricket analytics now. That's a big thing in T20 cricket. So those are the deficient areas which have led the West Indies to this position of not being able to qualify for the semi-final round. And I hope that hard lessons are learned coming out of this World Cup, and it will not be repeated for that next World Cup in 2022.
You ready for some letters from Chris Gale, Daren? Perhaps the same kind that he wrote to Montrose and God knows who else. He doesn't do letters. He puts posts and he does interviews about himself in third person. You got to love him, Chris Gale. Anyway, we will talk about the West Indies bowling as well now, shall we? Because while the spotlight, Tom, has essentially been on their batting, which has been a huge disappointment ever since that 60 all out against England. Interesting that Daren and Mahela spent a lot of time last time against Sri Lanka saying there is an X factor missing. Sunil Narayan isn't here anymore. They do not have the 140, 150 clicks pace bowler, even though Shane Thomas was part of this squad. West Indies clearly don't feel confident to play him. And whether that is also a concern which perhaps has not been given as much attention given the batting debacle.
Yeah, look, absolutely. There's no doubt that their bowling attack, and they'll probably rip through Australia today after me saying this, but there's no doubt their bowling attack lacks teeth. It lacks real sort of bite. As you said, they don't have a mystery spinner. Yeah, they've got some capable spinners, but they don't have Sunil Narayan playing, even though that I'm sure if he was given the phone call, prior to the World Cup selection, he would have accepted the opportunity. They don't have genuine pace, and we've seen how important over recent years how genuine pace is really important. It's come back into fashion, if I could put it that way, in T20 cricket, whether that's because a lot of the T20 games of recent years have been played in the UAE, where it suits more genuine pace against in India, for instance. So they don't have the 150 bowler, they don't have the mystery spin. So there's a lot of sameness around what they bring to the table. End of the day, T20 cricket, like in form of the game, you've got to take wickets. And if you're not taking wickets, you're not in the contest.
Is the solution here, Daren, finding a way to get Sunil Narayan back, or investing in the likes of Hayden Walsh and Akil Hussain? And what's the O'Shane Thomas story? He's got the pace. Is he not the finished product yet?
Well, with regard to Sunil Narayan, I don't think you can peg the success of a bowling unit on one bowler. Yes, he's a world-class bowler. He's had his issues with the legality of his action, and he's had that injury to his bowling hand that continues to persist. So I don't think Sunil Narayan is going to be the solution going forward for the West Indies from a bowling point of view. What I can say is the West Indies hasn't shown a lot of faith in young players in this World Cup, and more so in young bowlers and bowlers who have done well in the past. You look at Hayden Walsh Jr. in that recent series against Australia in the Caribbean when the West Indies won 4-1. He was the leading wicket taker, and in this World Cup, he hasn't been sort of given the confidence as a leading spinner for the West Indies, and that to me is not helpful for a young guy like Hayden Walsh Jr. still trying to cement himself in international cricket. You got to give guys like these confidence in playing them against tough opposition, playing them so that they can deliver and show their stock as bowlers. Walsh Jr. is a wrist spinner. We all know how crucial wrist spinners are to T20 cricket. He should have been persisted with, even I would say ahead of Akil Hussain, who is a more defensive spinner. So as a captain, as I mentioned before, Karen Pollard has gone very conservative in the decision making for players in his 11, and he's paid a heavy price for that. If you look at the wicket taking, not many of the bowlers have been out and out wicket takers. So, and O'Shane Thomas, definitely, those are players who can add dimension, they bring an X factor. And in T20 cricket, especially if your batting is struggling, you want to have bowlers who can take wickets and give you a chance with the ball as well.
I'll tell you what, there's a conversation I want to have about Karen Pollard, whether that's the way to go going forward, but that's for another show, maybe at the end of this. With Australia, I'd be wondering why we spend so much time on this pre-show discussing the West Indies when they're the ones that are in contention for the semi-finals. So let's give Australia a couple of minutes, shall we? Adam Zampa's fresh of a 5-wicket haul, his first in T20 eyes, and his numbers continue to be on the rise. Seems to be the big threat, especially in Abu Dhabi, and something we've noticed since 2020 is that the numbers are excellent against left-handers too. So the average is good. The economy rate is better than right-handers. In fact, so for all these matchups, Zampa's a vastly improved bowler, Tom, against left-hand bats too. And I just wonder where you place him in terms of the leading wrist spinners in T20 cricket. Rashid Khan's name, of course, comes to mind. There aren't a lot of them around. Chahil's not with India. But where does Zampa stand in this current game for you?
Well, he's right up there. You know, Adil Rashid from England is definitely one that you would put in the top category. It's interesting. Zampa is a classic sort of flying under the radar type bowling option for Australia, and sometimes that sits well, with bowlers. And I think it sits well with him, sort of being a bowler that doesn't get a lot of attention because there's always a lot of hoo-ha around Stark and his capabilities, Pat Cummins and what he can do. And suddenly Hazelwood's back into T20 cricket and doing well after a good tournament with IPL with Chennai, and suddenly Zampa gets forgotten in all of this. But I think he quite enjoys being sort of in that position. He's a very clever bowler. He's got very good control. There's no surprise that his numbers are good against left-handers because he does bowl a very tight line to left-handed, and he's got a good wrong on. He doesn't really rely on a big turning leg spinner. So he does challenge the left-handers from both over and round the wicket. Good package for Australia, perfectly positioned where they need him to bowl in those middle overs, creating pressure. And obviously, Aaron Finch has got the ability to rotate some genuine pace at the other end that's of good quality, which creates pressure as well for him, which enables him to be more potent.
Yeah, when you look at the leading wicket takers in the last couple of years in T20, as Adam Zampa's name is in those top 5, how much does Zampa get mentioned in comparison to the others is a question for you. We've heard a lot about Shamsi occupying the number 1 spot, Hasaranga too, Adil Rashid, as Tom Moody mentions, among the leading spinners. You see 4 wrist spinners out of 5 there. That's nice to see. Or Hasaranga, whatever sort of spinner he may be, whatever you want to call him. But anyway, Haris Rough there too. So Zampa's been good. Now, all this, the door of this pre-show, essentially, Daren, has been that Australia are going to hammer the West Indies. But the West Indies like playing Australia in this tournament. This is a nothing to lose sort of game. Are we a little worried if we're Australia?
You should be worried if you're Australia. West Indies, they have a record of doing very well in dead rubbers. So just like what Sri Lanka did to the West Indies, there's a lot less pressure. The pressure of expectation is no longer there. Players can play freely. You just never know what you can get with this West Indian side. You know, Chris Gayle and some of the senior players might still be wanting to prove a point. So this is a dangerous West Indian side. And what they've done is they've gone with their same team, very much what they think is their best team. So hopefully, from a West Indian point of view, a win could probably see them bow out on a high note.
Yeah, you never cease to amaze me, Daren. Always I know you'll give me one nugget which I won't get anywhere else. West Indies have a great record in dead rubbers, is my nugget from today. How you've managed to dig that one out is beyond me, but well done to you. Tom, Australia, West Indies, this is a fixture the West Indies seem to always be charged up for. The Aussies would want them to be checked out like Bangladesh. West Indies are a bit stronger than that, aren't they?
Well, the West Indies are in a very dangerous position from Australia's perspective, because they've got players that can win the game off their own bat or with a ball in hand. I think collectively they're not playing well enough to beat Australia, but I think there's individuals there like a Lewis, like a Nicholas Pooran, a Hetmeyer. Pollard might play one of his blistering finishing innings that propels their score from a 150 to a 175. They've got those players with the X factor. Whether they turn up tonight, we're yet to see. But certainly collectively, they're not playing well enough to challenge Australia tonight, I don't think.
All right, brilliant. That's what I wanted to hear from Tom Moody. Got to the point at the end. That's where he sees this game going. Let's see how things go. Chris Gayle has come out in his shades, and he started with a 2 and a quick single. So he doesn't want to occupy too many dot balls today. This should be fun one way or the other. Daren, Ganga, Tom Moody, pick up the chat in 20 overs time. In what is a must-win game for Australia, they do not want to leave their fate in England's hands to beat South Africa in the evening fixture today. But we'll have you covered on Maruti Suzuki Presents ESPN Cricket Info T20 timeout powered by Dell as Group 1 comes to a close in the Super 12s. Join us at halftime.
Maruti Suzuki's People Technology presents Suzuki Connect with Navigate to Car and many other features.
Watch more, feel more, Dell.